She hadn't spoken to a stranger in almost 2 years. Not a word. Not a wave. Not even a glance that lasted longer than 3 seconds. 5 years old and locked inside a silence so thick her father had stopped hoping it would break. Then one evening, in a restaurant full of people who didn't matter, she tugged on her father's sleeve, pointed at a waitress across the room, and 2 words left her lips that stopped his heart. "She's warm." What happened next didn't just change their dinner plans. It changed the entire trajectory of 3 lives that were never supposed to collide. If this kind of story pulls you in, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me, have you ever felt an instant, unexplainable connection with a complete stranger? Drop your story below. Now let's get into it. The reservation was for 7:30, but Woo Hyun Jung arrived at 7:15 because that was what he did. He arrived early, he controlled variables, he eliminated surprises. Surprises had never been kind to him. Marchetti's was the kind of restaurant that existed for people like him. Dim lighting that forgave tired eyes, tables spaced far enough apart that conversation stayed private, a wine list that functioned as a quiet declaration of wealth. He didn't love it, but it served a purpose. Tonight's purpose was a dinner with 2 partners from a venture capital firm who wanted to discuss a Series B expansion across 3 Asian markets. Woo Hyun could have had this meeting in a boardroom. He preferred restaurants because restaurants had exits. He settled into the corner booth with Minji pressed against his side. Her small body curled inward the way it always was in public spaces, knees drawn up, fingers twisting the hem of her coat, eyes scanning every doorway in the room. She'd been doing that since she was 3, checking doors, making sure they stayed open. The hostess had tried to close the coat closet near their table, and Minji's breathing had gone shallow, her fingers digging into Woo Hyun's arm, until he quietly asked the hostess to leave it open. She looked confused, but complied. People always complied when Woo Hyun asked. It was the voice, low, measured, carrying the kind of authority that came not from volume but from the unspoken suggestion that he could buy the building and turn it into a parking lot if the evening displeased him. He wasn't that man, of course. Not really. But he'd learned to wear that man like armor, and the armor had kept him functional for 22 months, ever since Soo-yeon walked out. He didn't think of her by name anymore. In his mind, she was simply the absence. A shape cut out of every photograph, every morning routine, every bedtime ritual that used to involve 2 parents, and now involved 1 parent and a silence so enormous it had its own gravity. Minji hadn't spoken to anyone outside their household since. Not her teachers. Not other children. Not the therapist Woo Hyun was paying $400 an hour. She spoke to him. Quietly. In Korean, mostly. In short sentences that contained enormous weight. She spoke to his mother when she visited from Seoul. She spoke to Mr. Park, the driver who'd been with them since Minji was born. Everyone else existed behind a glass wall that Minji had erected with the terrifying efficiency of a 5-year-old who had decided that if people could leave, they didn't deserve her voice. The partners arrived. Handshakes. The performative warmth of men who wanted something. Woo Hyun's attention split cleanly, half on the pitch, half on Minji, who was drawing on the children's menu with a crayon the color of rust. She drew what she always drew. Doors. Open doors, closed doors, doors with locks, doors without handles. Her therapist had a file full of these drawings. None of them had led to a breakthrough. The waitress appeared 20 minutes into the meeting. Woo Hyun registered her the way he registered all service staff, peripherally, functionally. Water, bread, specials recited with practiced ease. He ordered for himself and Minji without looking up. Grilled salmon for him, plain pasta with butter for her. But Minji looked up. Later, Woo Hyun would replay this moment with the obsessive precision of a man trying to locate the exact second his life forked. Minji, who hadn't made voluntary eye contact with a stranger in 22 months, lifted her head from her drawing and stared at the waitress with an expression Woo Hyun had never seen on his daughter's face. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The kind of look you give someone you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. The waitress, her name tag read Nadia, hadn't done anything remarkable. She'd smiled at Minji the way waitresses smile at children, warm but generic, the professional kindness of someone who works for tips. She'd crouched slightly to be at Minji's eye level when she'd asked if the little one wanted anything to drink. Apple juice. Woo Hyun had answered for her. Because Minji didn't answer for herself. Not anymore. Nadia had nodded, straightened, turned to leave, and Minji grabbed her father's sleeve. The tug was urgent. Not the lazy pull of a bored child, but the desperate clutch of someone trying to communicate something enormous through the only channel available. Woo Hyun looked down. Minji's eyes were wide, her lips parted, and for one agonizing second he thought she was going to cry. Instead, she pointed at Nadia's retreating back, and her voice, clear, in English, loud enough for the entire section to hear, shattered 22 months of silence. She's warm. The venture capital partners stopped talking. A woman at the next table paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. Even the ambient piano music seemed to hesitate, though that was probably Woo Hyun's imagination rewiring the memory to match its magnitude. 2 words. 14 letters. 22 months of silence shattered like a window hit by a stone. Nadia turned around, surprised, but not startled. She looked at Minji with a softness that suggested she hadn't fully understood what had just happened. That she was witnessing not a child's random observation, but a seismic event in the emotional geography of a family. That's really sweet, honey. Nadia smiled, genuine, unhurried. As if 5-year-olds said profound things to her every night, and she received each one with the same quiet grace. Woo Hyun couldn't speak. His throat had closed around something that felt dangerously like hope, and hope was a substance he'd trained himself to distrust. He managed a nod, stiff, controlled, the nod of a man holding himself together with nothing but willpower and a bespoke suit. The dinner continued. The venture capital conversation resumed, but Woo Hyun heard none of it. He watched Nadia move through the restaurant with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been doing this long enough to make it look effortless, refilling water glasses before they were empty, clearing plates without interrupting conversations, laughing at a joke from the bartender with a warmth that reached her eyes. And he watched Minji watch Nadia. His daughter tracked her across the room like a compass needle finding north. When Nadia brought Minji's pasta, she set it down gently. Plain pasta with butter. My favorite when I was your age, too. Minji didn't respond verbally, but she did something she hadn't done with a stranger in almost 2 years. She smiled. It was small. Barely a movement. The kind of smile that would be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, with the desperate attention of a father who'd been waiting 22 months to see his daughter's face do something other than guard itself. Woo Hyun excused himself before dessert. He told the partners something about an early morning, apologized with the practiced insincerity of a man who never actually apologized, and paid the bill with a tip that would cover Nadia's rent for a month. Then he carried Minji to the car, buckled her into her seat, and sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes before he could drive. His hands were shaking. He didn't go back to Marchetti's the next night, or the night after. He told himself it was a coincidence, a fluke of chemistry, a random synapse firing in Minji's traumatized brain. He told himself he didn't need a stranger to fix what an army of specialists couldn't. But on the 4th night, Minji tugged his sleeve at bedtime. The same tug, the same urgency. The words came in Korean this time, quiet and certain. I want to see the warm lady. Woo Hyun went back to Marchetti's the next evening. He requested Nadia's section. She recognized Minji immediately. Hey, it's my butter pasta girl. She crouched down again, eye level, unhurried. You want the same thing tonight? Minji nodded. Then, impossibly, she held out her crayon drawing, a door, wide open, with what might have been a person standing in the light beyond it. Is this for me? Nadia's voice dropped, not with pity, but with the instinctive reverence of someone who understood they were being given something precious. Minji nodded again. Nadia took the drawing, studied it with genuine attention. Not the performative 2-second glance adults give children's art before filing it in the trash. This is beautiful. I'm going to keep this. She folded it carefully and slid it into her apron pocket, next to her order pad and a pen with a chewed cap. That was the night Woo Hyun decided he needed to talk to Nadia Cross. He waited until her shift ended. She came out the service entrance at 11:40, coat zipped to her chin, breath visible in the Chicago cold. November in this city was a personal attack. Wind off the lake that cut through every layer. Darkness that arrived at 4:30 and didn't leave until 7 the next morning. Mr. Jung. She stopped, keys in hand, wary but not afraid. She dealt with wealthy men who lingered after closing. She knew the species. Can I help you? My daughter doesn't speak to strangers. She hasn't in almost 2 years. She spoke to you. The words came out flat, without embellishment, because embellishment would have required him to acknowledge the emotion behind the facts, and he wasn't ready for that. Nadia's expression shifted. Surprise. Then something softer. Then a careful neutrality that told him she was used to guarding her reactions. I didn't know that. She seems like a sweet kid. I'd like to offer you a position. As her companion, a caretaker of sorts. Someone who spends time with her during the day, engages with her, helps her feel safe. He paused. The compensation would be significantly more than what you earn here. Nadia's jaw tightened. There it was. The thing he'd expected. The pride that lived in the bones of people who worked service jobs and knew that the world's Woo Hyuns saw them as problems that could be solved with a check. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Jung, but I'm not a nanny. I'm a waitress, and I have my own things going on. I understand. The offer stands. He handed her a card, matte black, embossed silver lettering, nothing but a name and a phone number. The kind of card that whispered rather than shouted. She took it, looked at him. Then she walked to the bus stop and waited 17 minutes in the freezing cold for the 66 to Pilsen. Because that was her life. Buses that ran late, and apartments that ran cold, and a savings account that never ran at all. She called 3 days later. Not because of the money, though the money mattered. She'd be lying to herself if she pretended it didn't. She called because she'd unfolded Minji's drawing 17 times since that night. And each time she looked at it, that open door, that figure standing in the light, something cracked in a place she'd spent 26 years sealing shut. Nadia Cross knew about doors. She'd walked through more of them than most people could imagine. Foster homes, group homes, transitional housing, the revolving door of a system that moved children like inventory. 31 placements by the time she aged out at 18. She'd never been adopted. Not once. 31 families had opened their doors, and 31 families had closed them behind her. She called Woo Hyun Jung because a 5-year-old girl was afraid of closed doors, and Nadia understood that fear in a way no $400 an hour therapist ever would. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower on Lakeshore Drive, the kind of address that existed in a different atmospheric layer than the rest of the city. Nadia arrived on her first morning with a backpack containing her sketchbook, a set of watercolors, and the irrational conviction that she was making a mistake. Mr. Park met her in the lobby. He was a man of about 60, compact and dignified, with the kind of quiet warmth that suggested he'd seen everything and judged nothing. He rode the elevator with her in comfortable silence. As the doors opened onto a marble foyer, his voice was warm. She's been waiting for you since 6. It was 8:15. Minji was sitting on the floor of a living room larger than Nadia's entire apartment, surrounded by crayons and paper, drawing doors. She looked up when Nadia walked in, and that look was there again. The recognition, the certainty, the unshakable conviction of a child who'd decided something and would not be moved. Hi, butter pasta girl. Nadia crouched down, eye level, unhurried. The same way she'd done it at the restaurant, because she'd learned long ago that the fastest way to earn a child's trust was to meet them where they were, physically and otherwise. Minji held out a crayon. Red. You want me to draw with you? A nod. Nadia sat cross-legged on the marble floor, took the crayon, and began to draw. Not a door. A window, wide open, curtains blowing. A bird sitting on the sill. Minji studied the drawing with the intensity of an art critic at a gallery opening. Then she picked up her own crayon and, for the first time, drew something that wasn't a door. She drew a bird. It was lopsided and enormous, with wings that extended off the edge of the paper, and it was the most beautiful thing Nadia had ever seen. Woo Hyun watched from the hallway. He'd told himself he'd observe for 10 minutes and then go to his office downstairs. He stayed for 45. The first week was a calibration. Nadia learning the architecture of Minji's silence. There were words now, but they came in fragments, like signals from a radio that couldn't quite find the frequency. Short sentences, mostly in English, always directed at Nadia and only Nadia. She asked for apple juice, more red, when she needed a crayon. Stay, when Nadia stood up to use the bathroom, and the panic in that single syllable was so sharp it cut. Nadia learned the rules fast. Never close a door completely. Leave everyone cracked at minimum. Never leave the room without announcing it and giving a time frame. Never, ever say goodbye without saying when she'd be back. Minji's world operated on guarantees of return, because the one person who should have guaranteed it had defaulted on the promise. By the second week, Minji was speaking in full sentences. Not to anyone else. Nadia remained the sole recipient of this miracle. But the sentences grew longer, more complex, layered with the kind of imaginative logic that 5-year-olds produce effortlessly, and adults spend years in therapy trying to recover. The bird doesn't want to go inside because inside has doors. If you draw a door without a handle, no one can close it. My mom went through a door, and the door ate her. That last one arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered with the casual brutality of a child who hadn't yet learned to dress trauma in euphemism. Nadia's hand stilled on her sketch pad. She breathed. She didn't flinch, didn't fill the silence with reassurance, didn't say any of the things adults say when they're more afraid of a child's pain than the child is. Doors don't eat people, Minji. But I understand why it feels that way. Minji considered this. Do you promise? I promise. Doors are just doors. They open and close, but they don't take people away. People make that choice themselves. It was the truth, and Nadia believed in giving children the truth even when it was heavy, because she'd spent her entire childhood drowning in well-meaning lies. You'll find a forever home. Someone will want you. This placement will be the last one. And the lies had done more damage than any truth ever could. Woo Hyun overheard this exchange through the cracked door of his study. He sat at his desk for a long time afterward, doing nothing, thinking about a woman who gave his daughter the truth when every expert he'd hired had given her coping mechanisms. The weeks folded into each other the way Chicago winter weeks do. Gray into gray, cold into colder, daylight shrinking until the city felt like it existed inside a permanent dusk. Nadia settled into a rhythm. Mornings with Minji, drawing, reading, walking to the park when the wind chill allowed it. Afternoons alone while Minji napped, during which Nadia sat in the kitchen of the penthouse and worked on her illustrations. Evenings back in Pilsen, where she wrote. Her book was called The Girl Who Opened Every Door. It was about a child named Lena who lived in a house where every door was locked, and she spent the story finding keys, under rugs, inside clocks, buried in flower pots, until she realized the last door didn't need a key at all. It just needed someone brave enough to push. She'd written it 2 years ago, before she knew Minji existed. She'd illustrated it in ink and watercolor, panel by panel, in a style that was half children's book, half graphic novel. It sat in a folder on her desk, unpublished, because self-publishing a picture book cost money she didn't have, and traditional publishers had sent back 11 rejection letters that all said the same thing in different fonts, beautiful but not commercial. She hadn't told anyone about it, not her co-workers at Marchetti's, who thought she was a waitress and nothing more. Not her roommate, who worked nights and slept days and communicated primarily through post-it notes on the refrigerator. The book was hers. the one private thing in a life that had never had much privacy. Woo Hyun found out by accident. He came home early on a Wednesday, a rare occurrence that disrupted the architecture of Nadia's afternoon routine. She was in the kitchen, sketchbook open, watercolors spread across the marble island, painting a door that looked suspiciously like the front door of the penthouse. She startled when she heard his footsteps, and in the scramble to clean up, she knocked the sketchbook to the floor. It fell open to a page near the end. Lena standing in front of the last door, the one without a lock, her hand raised to push. Woo Hyun picked it up before she could reach it. He looked at the illustration for a long time. Then he flipped backward through the book, page by page, reading the story that was written in Nadia's handwriting alongside the paintings. Nadia stood very still, arms crossed, jaw tight. She felt the way she always felt when someone accessed a part of her she hadn't offered, exposed, cornered, already preparing the version of herself that pretended not to care. "You wrote this." His voice was different than his business voice, his father voice, his giving orders voice. It was the voice of a man caught off guard, and Woo Hyun-jung did not enjoy being caught off guard. "It's just a project. A hobby thing." "This isn't a hobby. This is..." He stopped himself, closed the sketchbook gently, set it on the counter between them like a bridge neither of them had consented to building. "It's extraordinary." She took the sketchbook back. "I should get going. Minji's napping and Mr. Park is here." "Nadia." Her name on his lips was rare enough to land with weight. "Why haven't you published this?" She looked at him with an expression that was half defiance, half exhaustion. "Because publishing a picture book costs money I don't have, and publishers don't want stories about kids with trauma unless the kid is a talking animal with a lesson plan attached. I'm aware of how the industry works. I've collected enough rejection letters to wallpaper my bathroom." He wanted to offer to fund it. The impulse was immediate, reflexive, the billionaire's solution to every problem, the checkbook as universal solvent. But something in her posture warned him that the offer would be received not as generosity, but as confirmation of every assumption she had about men like him. So he said nothing. And the silence between them that evening was different from all the silences before. It was a silence that contained the shape of something forming, something neither of them was ready to name. December arrived with the kind of cold that made Chicago feel like an endurance test. Nadia's apartment in Pilsen had a heater that ran on optimism and duct tape. It worked when it wanted to, which was increasingly never. She wore 2 sweaters to bed and woke up to see her breath in the air above her pillow. She didn't mention it. She would never mention it. But Mr. Park mentioned it, because Mr. Park noticed everything and had the quiet diplomatic instincts of a man who'd spent 30 years managing the logistics of other people's lives. "Ms. Cross, the guest suite is available if you'd prefer not to commute in this weather. The roads are very bad." The roads were fine. Mr. Park was not a man who let roads stop him. But the offer was made with such sincere, fatherly concern that Nadia heard what he was really saying. "The heater in your apartment is broken and you're too proud to say so, and we both know it." She stayed one night, then 2. Then the storm that weather forecasters had been threatening for a week finally arrived. A lake-effect blizzard that buried the city under 14 inches and turned every street into an impassable canyon of white. The penthouse became a snow globe. Woo Hyun worked from his study. Nadia and Minji built a fort out of couch cushions and spent the afternoon inside it, drawing and telling stories. Minji fell asleep in the fort at 4 o'clock, her head on Nadia's shoulder, crayon still in her fist. Nadia sat very still, afraid to breathe, afraid to disturb the weight of this child against her body. She'd held children before, in foster homes, in group homes, other people's children who passed through her life like weather. But none of them had fallen asleep on her. Falling asleep on someone was an act of trust so profound it undid every defense she had. Woo Hyun found them like that. He stood in the doorway of the living room. The door was open, always open, and looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully against a woman he'd known for 6 weeks, and something fundamental rearranged itself inside his chest. He sat down on the other side of the couch, close enough that his knee nearly touched Nadia's. They didn't speak. Outside, the snow erased the city. Inside, the only sounds were Minji's breathing and the building's heating system, which worked flawlessly because buildings that cost this much didn't have heating systems that failed. Nadia turned her head slightly, and their eyes met over his sleeping daughter. And the look that passed between them was not the beginning of something. It was the acknowledgement that something had already begun. Weeks ago, in a restaurant where a child had pointed at a stranger and said she's warm. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. The snow kept falling. It was Nadia who broke first. She looked down at Minji, then back at Woo Hyun, and whispered, "I should put her to bed." "I'll do it." His voice was rough. He gathered Minji into his arms with the practiced tenderness of a man who'd been carrying his daughter, literally and figuratively, for 2 years without help. Minji stirred, murmured something in Korean, and burrowed deeper into his neck. At the hallway, he turned back. Nadia was still on the couch, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself, the posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime making herself small enough to survive other people's spaces. "Nadia," that weight again. "Thank you, not for today, for all of it." She nodded. He left. The door stayed open. January was brutal. Even by Chicago standards, even by the standards of a city that treated winter as a personality trait, January that year was an act of atmospheric hostility. Temperatures hit -15, wind chills pushed past -30, and the lake froze into an alien landscape of jagged ice that looked like another planet's surface. Nadia stopped going back to Pilsen. It happened incrementally. One more night, then another. Then her toothbrush appeared in the guest bathroom, and her watercolors took up permanent residence on the kitchen island, and her coat hung next to Minji's in the hallway closet, a small jacket beside a smaller one. And nobody acknowledged the domesticity of it, because acknowledging it would have required naming what was happening. And none of them were ready for names. Minji was blossoming. There was no other word for it. She spoke in full paragraphs now, elaborate, imaginative monologues about birds and doors and a princess who lived in a castle with no walls, because walls were just doors that had given up. She spoke only to Nadia and Woo Hyun and Mr. Park. But the therapist, the $400 an hour one, called the progress extraordinary, unprecedented, actually. Whatever was happening in this household, it was working. What was happening in the household was that Nadia Cross had walked through an open door and hadn't left. And Minji, who had organized her entire emotional architecture around the certainty that people left, didn't know what to do with someone who stayed. So she tested it, the way children test everything, relentlessly, creatively, with the experimental rigor of tiny scientists running trials on the hypothesis that love is conditional. She spilled juice on Nadia's sketchbook. Nadia cleaned it up without anger and showed Minji how watercolor looked different on wet paper. She refused to eat for an entire day. Nadia didn't beg or bribe. She sat at the table with her own plate, ate her own food, and talked about her own day as if nothing was unusual. Minji ate dinner. She screamed at 3 a.m, a nightmare, the door nightmare, the one where all the doors in the house slam shut at once and she can't get out. Nadia was there before Woo Hyun, sitting on the edge of Minji's bed, not touching her until Minji reached for her, because Nadia knew that touch was a door too, and you had to let the other person open it. That night, after Minji fell back asleep, Nadia walked to the kitchen to get water and found Woo Hyun already there, standing at the counter in the dark, staring out at the frozen city. "You were faster than me." His voice in the dark. No accusation. Something closer to wonder. "Light sleeper. Foster kid thing. You learn to wake up at every sound because in some houses, sounds at 3 a.m. meant you needed to be alert." He turned to look at her. The city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows painted her in blue and silver, and Woo Hyun felt something split open inside him. Not the controlled, managed emotions he allowed himself during business hours, but something raw and ungovernable that he'd been pushing down since the night of the snowstorm. "Tell me about it. The foster care." She leaned against the counter opposite him, 4 feet of marble between them. 31 placements. 18 years. I aged out without being adopted. The short version is that a lot of people opened their doors, and every single one of them closed those doors behind me. The long version is a lot sadder, and I don't tell it at 3 a.m. "When do you tell it?" "I don't." Silence. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere below them, the city's snowplows scraped metal against asphalt in a sound like mechanical grief. My daughter is afraid of closed doors because her mother walked out and never came back. No armor this time, no CEO voice, without the controlled vocabulary of a man who'd spent 2 years translating his devastation into professional language. "I've spent 22 months trying to fix that. I've hired therapists and child psychologists and behavioral specialists and a woman who does art therapy with horses, and none of them got Minji to speak. You did that in one evening by crouching down and calling her butter pasta girl." "I didn't do anything. She chose me. Kids know things adults have forgotten how to see." "I know. That's what scares me." The space between them was 4 feet, then 3, then 2. Woo Hyun moved first, closing the distance with the deliberate, controlled movements of a man who made decisions worth millions before lunch, and was somehow undone by the proximity of a woman standing barefoot in his kitchen. He lifted his hand, stopped. His fingers hovered near her face without touching, as if asking permission in the language of almost. Nadia stood very still. She could feel the heat of his hand near her cheek. She could smell his cologne. Something clean and expensive that she'd been pretending not to notice for weeks. She could hear her own heartbeat, and it infuriated her. Because she'd spent 26 years building a version of herself that didn't need anyone. And this man and his broken daughter were dismantling that version brick by brick. Woo Hyun. His name on her lips for the first time, not Mr. Jung. Woo Hyun. It changed the air pressure in the room. "I know." He dropped his hand, stepped back. The 4 feet returned, but they felt different now. Charged, electric, a distance that was no longer neutral but loaded with the memory of how small it had been a moment ago. "This is complicated." A fact, not a protest. "I know that too." She went back to the guest room. He stayed in the kitchen until the sky turned gray. They didn't discuss it. The almost lived between them like a secret they both kept from themselves. And the weeks that followed were an exercise in contained combustion. Every interaction loaded, every accidental touch cataloged and replayed, every conversation underlaid with the subtext of 2 people who wanted something they hadn't given themselves permission to want. Minji, with the radar children have for emotional weather systems, sensed the shift. She began drawing something new. Not doors, not birds, but people. 2 tall figures and 1 small one. She drew them holding hands. She drew them in a house with no doors at all, just open archways filled with light. One evening in early February, Minji looked at Nadia with the solemn, appraising expression of a 5-year-old Supreme Court justice and asked, "Are you going to stay?" Nadia looked at Woo Hyun. Woo Hyun looked at Nadia. Between them, a 5-year-old girl held her breath, waiting for an answer to a question that was really about everything she'd lost, and everything she was terrified of losing again. "I'm here right now, Minji, and right now is what matters." It was the most honest answer Nadia could give. It was also the answer of a woman who'd learned never to promise tomorrow, because tomorrow had never been promised to her. Minji accepted it. She went back to her drawing. The 2 tall figures and the small one, archways of light. The almost didn't break until Valentine's Day. Not because of the date. Woo Hyun didn't observe manufactured sentimentality, and Nadia had never received a Valentine in her life. A fact she'd shared once, casually, as if it didn't contain the weight of 26 years of being unchosen. It broke because Minji asked Nadia to read her a bedtime story, and Nadia, without thinking, reached for the manuscript of The Girl Who Opened Every Door. She read the whole thing, every page. Minji listened with the intensity of a child hearing her own story, told back to her in the language of metaphor. When Nadia reached the last page, Lena pushing open the final door, the one without a lock, the one that just needed bravery, Minji's voice was certain. "That's me." "Yeah, sweetheart, that's you. And you're the door." Nadia's breath caught, because Minji was right. Nadia was the door, the one that opened without conditions, without locks, without the implicit threat of closing. And she realized, sitting on the edge of this child's bed in a penthouse she didn't belong in, that she was also the girl in the story. She'd been Lena her entire life, pushing open doors. And now, for the first time, she was on the other side. She tucked Minji in, walked into the hallway, and nearly collided with Woo Hyun, who'd been standing outside the door, the open door, listening to every word. He didn't speak. He pulled her toward him with a desperation that had nothing to do with control or calculation, or the measured precision with which he conducted every other aspect of his life. His hands found her face, both hands, cupping her jaw, tilting her toward him. And he kissed her in the hallway of his own home, while his daughter slept 10 feet away, and the Chicago wind howled against the windows like an animal trying to get in. She kissed him back. Not tentatively, not politely, not the way women in her position were supposed to kiss men in his position. She kissed him with 26 years of unclaimed desire, with the ferocity of a woman who had never been chosen and was choosing now, choosing this, choosing him. When they pulled apart, foreheads touching, breathing ragged, she whispered, "This changes everything. Everything already changed. The night she pointed at you." March came in with a false spring. 3 days of 40-degree weather that fooled the city into optimism, before winter reasserted itself with a late-season ice storm that coated every surface in glass. Nadia should have recognized it as a metaphor. The warmth was temporary. The ice was coming. Woo Hyun's mother, Mrs. Shin, arrived from Seoul on the first day of the false spring. She was a woman of 72 who carried herself like the chairwoman of a dynasty, which she was. Woo Hyun's wealth was inherited before it was multiplied, and Mrs. Shin held the original shares like they were sacred texts. She spoke English fluently, dressed immaculately, and assessed Nadia in under 30 seconds with the practiced efficiency of a woman who'd been sizing up threats to her family's legacy for 5 decades. She didn't approve. She didn't disapprove. She watched. She observed Nadia with Minji, the way her granddaughter lit up, the way words poured out of the child like water from a broken dam, the way Minji reached for Nadia's hand instinctively when they walked, when they sat, when they did anything at all. She observed Woo Hyun observing Nadia, and the look on her son's face told her everything she needed to know and everything she was afraid of. She's the help, Woo Hyun. Late evening, Minji asleep. Nadia gone to Pilsen for the night to collect clothes. Mrs. Shin's voice was not cruel, it was factual. She dealt in facts the way her son dealt in numbers, with clarity, without apology. She's not the help. She's a waitress you hired to watch your child. What else would you call it? I'd call it the only thing that's worked. Mrs. Shin paused. She understood what her son was saying and what he wasn't. She understood that this was not a conversation about staffing, but about the architecture of her son's emotional survival. And she understood, because she was not a villain, merely a woman shaped by specific expectations. That challenging him on Nadia meant challenging the only stability Minji had found. Be careful. That child has already lost one woman. She can't afford to lose another because you confused gratitude with love. It landed like a blade, because it was precise enough to be true. Was that what this was? Gratitude? The desperate attachment of a man who'd been drowning and grabbed the first hand that reached into the water. Woo Hyun didn't answer his mother. He didn't answer because he didn't know. Mrs. Shin left after a week. She kissed Minji goodbye, nodded at Nadia with a politeness that was neither warm nor cold, and told Woo-hyun at the door, "I trust you. I always have. But trust yourself carefully." The visit unsettled things. Not visibly. The routine continued. The drawing and the reading and the bedtime stories and the quiet evenings after Minji slept, when Woo-hyun and Nadia sat in the living room pretending to read while the space between them hummed with everything they weren't saying. But beneath the surface, Mrs. Shin's question had burrowed into Woo-hyun's mind like a splinter. Gratitude or love. He began pulling back, subtly at first. Later evenings at the office, fewer dinners at home, a return to the professional distance that had characterized their early weeks. Nadia noticed immediately because Nadia had spent a lifetime calibrating the exact temperature of people's attention, and she could detect a half-degree drop the way others detected earthquakes. She didn't confront him. Confrontation required the belief that you deserved to stay, and that belief was one Nadia had never fully internalized. Instead, she did what she'd always done. She prepared to leave, quietly, privately, without drama. She began packing her things at the penthouse, moving her toothbrush back to its travel case, bringing her watercolors home to Pilsen one set at a time. It was during one of these quiet retreats, a Thursday evening, Minji asleep, Woo-hyun at a late meeting, that Nadia found the letter. She wasn't snooping. She was looking for tape in the kitchen drawer to fix a torn page in Minji's drawing book. The letter was in the drawer, half hidden under a roll of parchment paper, as if someone had stashed it quickly and forgotten to move it to a safer place. It was from Soo-yeon, handwritten, in English, dated 3 days before she left. Nadia's hands shook as she read it, not because of what it said about Soo-yeon's departure, which she'd already understood from the fragments Woo-hyun had shared, but because of one paragraph near the end. Soo-yeon wrote that she had gone to the restaurant in Gold Coast, the one Woo-hyun had taken her to for their anniversary. She had sat at the bar alone, and a waitress had talked to her. A young woman she described as carrying a kindness that came from knowing cruelty. Soo-yeon hadn't told her who she was, but the waitress had said something she would never forget, that sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is admit she's not the mother her child needs. Soo-yeon wrote that the words struck her like a truth she'd been hiding from, that she'd known for months she wasn't the mother Minji needed, and that the waitress had given her the last piece of courage to admit it. Nadia read it twice, 3 times. Her vision blurred. The kitchen tilted. She remembered that night. She remembered it clearly. A woman at the bar, beautiful, visibly anguished, drinking white wine too fast and staring at the door like she was calculating the distance to a different life. Nadia had done what she always did with lonely customers. She'd been present. She'd listened. And when the woman had said she was a terrible mother, Nadia had said, not as advice, not as judgment, but as something she carried in her bones from 18 years in a system full of mothers who stayed when they shouldn't have. Sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is admit she's not the mother her child needs. She hadn't meant leave. She'd meant get help. She'd meant change. She'd meant be honest with yourself about what your child needs and become that person, or find someone who can help you become that person. But Soo-yeon had heard what she needed to hear, and she'd left. Nadia put the letter back in the drawer. She picked up her bag. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed behind her. She made it to the lobby before the weight of it hit her. The monstrous, nauseating irony that she, Nadia Cross, who had been abandoned by every mother figure she'd ever known, had been the one to give another woman permission to abandon her child. That the little girl whose silence she'd broken was silent because of words Nadia had spoken to a stranger in a restaurant 2 years ago. She sat on a bench in the lobby of a building she didn't belong in and cried until she couldn't breathe. She didn't tell Woo-hyun. Not that night, not the next morning, not the next week. She showed up. She cared for Minji. She drew birds and opened doors and houses without walls, and she carried the knowledge of what she'd done like a stone sewn into her coat. But Woo-hyun found the letter. Of course he did. He found it the way people find things they're not looking for, casually, accidentally, in the process of looking for something mundane. and the mundane erased itself in the face of the monstrous. He read the letter. He read the paragraph. He read it again. And then he sat at the kitchen counter and did the math that Nadia had already done. The timeline, the restaurant, the waitress who was kind in the way that comes from having known cruelty. She was in the living room with Minji when he came in. She could tell by his face. She could tell by the way he moved. Stiff, controlled, the armor back on but cracked now, fissured, the damage visible beneath the surface. Minji, go to your room and play. Daddy needs to talk to Nadia. Minji looked between them, the emotional radar. She knew. Children always know. She went to her room but didn't close the door. Were you going to tell me? His voice was quiet. The dangerous quiet. The one that preceded not explosions but implosions. The kind of anger that collapses inward and crushes everything in its gravity. I found out the same night you did, last Thursday. The letter was in the drawer. You talked to her. You sat with my wife in a bar and you told her. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know she was your wife. I didn't know she had a daughter. She was a woman at a bar who was in pain, and I said something I believed to be true. Something you believed. He laughed, short, airless, the laugh of a man discovering that the thing he built his recovery on was constructed from the same material as his destruction. You told the mother of my child that it was brave to leave, and she left, and my daughter stopped speaking for 2 years. And then you showed up and fixed it. And what? I was supposed to be grateful. I was supposed to fall in love with the woman who... He stopped. The word love had fallen out before he could catch it, and it hung in the air between them like something detonated. Nadia's face was wet. She wasn't wiping the tears. She stood in the middle of his living room with her hands at her sides and let the tears fall because she would not hide from this. She would not protect herself from the truth of what she'd done, however accidental, however well-intentioned. I didn't tell her to leave. I told her that admitting you're not the mother your child needs is brave. I meant get help. I meant change. I meant be honest. I didn't mean walk away. But she did walk away. Yes, she did. And I will carry that for the rest of my life. But Woo-hyun, Soo-hyun was already leaving. That letter proves it. She'd known for months I was the last person she talked to, not the reason she left. How can you possibly know that? Because I've spent my entire life being left. And I know what a person looks like when they've already decided to go. Their body is already somewhere else. Their eyes are already at the door. She wasn't asking for advice that night. She was asking for absolution. And I gave it to her because I didn't know what she was going to do with it. The silence that followed was the worst sound Nadia had ever heard. Worse than doors closing. Worse than social workers saying this placement didn't work out. Worse than the nothing that came after every family that sent her back. I need you to leave. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. The words came out the way they do when you know what you're saying is wrong, but can't stop yourself from saying, with the rigid, brittle control of a man choosing self-destruction because the alternative was vulnerability. Nadia nodded. She picked up her coat. She walked to Minji's room, knelt in front of the open door. Hey, butter pasta girl. I have to go home for a while. But I want you to know something. You are the bravest person I've ever met. And doors are just doors. They open and close, but they don't take people away. Remember that. Minji's face crumpled. You said right now is what matters. It is. And right now, I love you. That doesn't change just because I walk through a door. She left. The elevator doors closed. In the penthouse, Minji stood in her bedroom doorway, watching the space where Nadia had been, and began to scream. Minji stopped speaking again. Not gradually, the way she'd started. This was instant, violent, a slamming shut so absolute that it was as if the previous 3 months had never happened. She stopped speaking to Nadia. She stopped speaking to Woo Hyun. She stopped speaking to Mr. Park, to her grandmother on the phone from Seoul, to the therapist who tried 3 emergency sessions in a week and got nothing but silence and drawings of doors, closed doors, locked doors, doors with chains and padlocks and boards nailed across them. The fear of doors exploded. She couldn't be in any room with a closed door. She couldn't ride in the car because car doors closed. She couldn't go to sleep because sleep meant closing her eyes, and closing her eyes was just another kind of door. Woo Hyun watched his daughter disintegrate and knew, with the cold, certain clarity of a man who'd been running from the truth and had just been cornered by it, that he was the one who'd done this. Not Soo-yeon, not Nadia, him. He'd taken the one person Minji trusted and pushed her away, because it was easier to be angry than to be afraid. And being in love with Nadia terrified him in ways that losing his wife never had. Losing Soo-yeon had been survivable, because Soo-yeon's leaving confirmed what Woo Hyun had always suspected, that love was a contractual arrangement subject to termination, and the smart move was to limit your exposure. Nadia was different. Nadia hadn't contracted to be there. She'd shown up because a child said she's warm, and Nadia had decided that warmth was reason enough to walk into a stranger's life and rearrange it. Losing Nadia was unsurvivable because Nadia's leaving was his fault, and his fault meant his choice, and his choice meant he could have chosen differently, and that kind of regret is the kind that eats you from the inside. He called his mother. Not for advice, Mrs. Shin was not a woman who gave advice. She gave verdicts, but because he needed to say out loud what he'd done so he could hear how it sounded in the air outside his own head. He told her about the letter, about Nadia, about the conversation in the restaurant 2 years ago, the accidental collision of 2 strangers that had set in motion the chain of events that led Soo-yeon to the door and, eventually, led Nadia through it. Mrs. Shin was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her words carried the measured precision of a woman who had lived long enough to know the difference between blame and cause. A woman drowning doesn't drown because someone standing on the shore describes the water. She drowns because she was already in the water. That girl didn't push your wife into the sea. She just named what the sea looked like. You sent away the only person your daughter chose, not a therapist you hired, not a specialist you vetted. The person Minji's heart recognized. How long do you think a 5-year-old's heart will wait for you to stop being afraid? He didn't answer because there was no answer. He hung up and sat in his study, door open, always open, and stared at the city below him, 27 floors of distance between himself and the street, where real people lived, real lives, and made real mistakes, and had the courage to fix them. In Pilsen, Nadia finished the book. She finished it in 2 weeks, working from midnight to dawn in her cold apartment, wrapped in sweaters, painting by the light of a desk lamp she'd bought at a thrift store for $6. The last chapter was new. She'd rewritten it after Minji, after Woo Hyun, after the letter, after all of it. The original ending had Lena pushing open the last door and finding a garden. The new ending had Lena pushing open the last door and finding an empty room. No garden. No magical reward. Just a room with a window, and through the window, the world, complicated, imperfect, full of doors that opened and closed without permission. And Lena stands there and realizes that the bravery wasn't in opening the door. The bravery was in staying in the room even when there's no guarantee of what comes next. It was the truest thing Nadia had ever written. She printed 1 copy at the FedEx on 18th Street. It cost her $43 she didn't have. She bound it herself with a cardboard cover and hand-stitched binding because she couldn't afford professional binding. And the imperfection of it, the slightly crooked pages, the thread that showed at the spine, made it more real than any polished hardcover could have been. She mailed it to the penthouse with a note. For Minji. Because she's the bravest person I know. Woo Hyun received it on a Tuesday. He sat on Minji's bed. Minji was on the floor, not speaking, drawing locked doors, and read it aloud, cover to cover, every page. His voice broke twice, 3 times. in places where the story was about Lena, and also about his daughter, and also about the woman he'd sent away. Minji listened without looking up. She drew while he read, not doors, but something new. Lines and curves that didn't resolve into recognizable shapes. Abstract. Urgent. The artistic output of a 5-year-old processing something too big for representational art. When he finished the last page, Lena in the empty room, looking through the window, choosing to stay, Minji put down her crayon. She looked at her father with the devastating clarity of a child who sees through every adult defense mechanism because she hasn't learned to build her own yet. You closed the door on her. It was the first thing she'd said in 12 days. And it was not a question. It was a verdict, delivered by a 5-year-old judge who had more moral authority on the subject of closed doors than any adult in the building. Woo-hyun's composure shattered. Not dramatically. There was no shouting, no throwing things, nothing cinematic. He simply sat on his daughter's bed and cried with the silent, shaking grief of a man who had spent 2 years not crying and had run out of reasons to hold it together. Minji climbed onto the bed. She put her small hand on his face. Open it. He drove to Pilsen himself. No Mr. Park, no car service, no buffer. He drove his own car, a thing he almost never did, through streets he didn't know, using GPS on his phone like any normal person in any normal life. And the normalcy of it felt like a confession. Nadia's building was on a street that looked nothing like Lakeshore Drive. 3 stories, brick, the kind of building that apologized for existing. The buzzer for apartment 3B didn't work. He stood on the sidewalk in the March cold and called her phone. She didn't answer. He called again. 3 times. 4. On the 5th call, she picked up and said nothing. He could hear her breathing. I read the book. Silence. You rewrote the ending. The room with the window. Lena staying even though there's no guarantee. Silence. But she hadn't hung up. I closed the door on you. Minji said it. She stopped speaking again, and the first thing she said after 12 days was, you closed the door on her. And she's right. I did it because I was afraid. And I've run a company worth $4 billion, and I don't know how to say what I need to say to you, because none of my skills are useful here. I can't buy this. I can't negotiate this. I can't structure this as a deal with terms and protections and exit clauses. I just have to stand on this sidewalk in this neighborhood I've never been to and tell you that I'm sorry. And that you didn't cause my wife to leave. She was already gone. You were just the last kind voice she heard, and I punished you for being kind. The buzzer clicked. The door opened. He climbed 3 flights of stairs, narrow, creaking, lit by a single bulb on each landing. Her door was open when he reached the top. She stood in the doorway of an apartment that could have fit inside his closet, wearing paint-stained sweats and the expression of a woman who was not going to make this easy for him. Your mother was right, you know. The first time, when she said you might be confusing gratitude with love. Nadia's voice was steady, but her eyes were wrecked. I need to know which one it is. Because I can survive being sent away. I've survived it 31 times. But I can't survive being chosen and then unchosen. Not by you, not after Minji. It's love. No hesitation, no qualification, no measured diplomatic phrasing. I knew it was love when you read Minji your book, and she said you're the door. Because she was right. You're the door I didn't know I was looking for, and I slammed it shut because I'm a coward, and I am standing in your apartment building that doesn't have a working buzzer asking you to forgive a coward who doesn't deserve it. Nadia looked at him for a long time. Her face did the thing faces do when they're fighting between the instinct to protect and the instinct to trust. A war that lasted seconds and centuries simultaneously. Minji. Barely above a whisper. I need to see Minji. They drove back together. Nadia's hand was on the console between the seats, and halfway across the city, somewhere around the intersection of Ashland and Division, at a red light that lasted 45 seconds, Woo-hyun reached over and took it. She let him. Her fingers closed around his with the grip of someone holding a rope over a canyon, and neither of them let go for the rest of the drive. Minji was in the living room with Mr. Park, who had the instincts to disappear the moment Woo Hyun and Nadia walked in. She looked up. She saw Nadia. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't say she's warm or any of the words that had started all of this. She walked, slowly, deliberately, with the dignity of a 5-year-old who has learned that reunions are fragile things and must be approached with care, across the living room to where Nadia was crouching, eye level, the way she always did. Minji put both hands on Nadia's face, small palms, warm fingers, the definitive touch of a child making a decision she would never reverse. You came back. I came back. You promise? Nadia looked up at Woo Hyun, who was standing behind his daughter with tears running silently down his face and no interest whatsoever in hiding them. I promise. Minji hugged her, arms around Nadia's neck, face buried in her shoulder. The full-body commitment of a child who has decided that this person is hers. And Nadia held her the way she'd wanted to be held by 31 families who never held on long enough. And something that had been broken in her for 26 years sealed itself shut. Not healed, not forgotten. Sealed. The way a bone knits back together. Stronger at the break than it was before. Woo Hyun knelt beside them. His arms went around both of them. His daughter and the woman his daughter had chosen. The woman he had chosen. The woman who'd walked through every open door in her life, looking for the one that would stay open, and had finally, impossibly, found it. They stayed like that on the living room floor for a long time, the three of them, holding on. Outside, the last ice of winter was melting off the windows, and through the glass, the city stretched towards spring. 7 months later, on a Saturday morning in October, a package arrived at the penthouse addressed to Nadia Cross-Young, a name that wasn't official yet, but that Minji had started using with the authoritative confidence of a child who had decided the future and was simply waiting for the adults to catch up. Inside the package were 20 hardcover copies of The Girl Who Opened Every Door, published by a small independent press in Brooklyn that specialized in stories the big houses were too afraid to tell. The cover featured Nadia's original watercolor, Lena standing before the last door, hand raised, ready to push, and beneath the title, in type small enough to be missed and large enough to matter, written and illustrated by Nadia Cross. For every child who's still looking for their door. The publisher had found Nadia, not the other way around. A literary agent who'd eaten at Marchetti's once, back when Nadia still worked there, had received a copy from a mutual friend, read it in one sitting, and called Nadia's old number with an offer that included an advance, a 2-book deal. And the sentence, you've been writing this story your whole life, haven't you? Woo Hyun had not funded the book. He'd wanted to. God, he'd wanted to. But Nadia had said no with the specific firmness of a woman who needed this victory to be entirely her own, unsubsidized, unsponsored, unbeholden. He'd respected it. Respecting Nadia's boundaries was the ongoing, humbling education of a man who'd spent his adult life believing that resources solved problems and was learning, slowly, that some problems could only be solved by getting out of the way. Minji was 6 now. She attended kindergarten at a school in Lincoln Park, where she spoke to her teacher, her classmates, and once, during a show and tell that Woo Hyun attended with the barely concealed anxiety of a parent watching his child perform a miracle, to the entire class, holding up a drawing of 3 people and a bird and a house with no doors, only archways, and saying, "This is my family. The tall one is my dad. The other tall one is Nadia. The small one is me. The bird is from a story. We don't have doors in our house because doors are just doors, but also they're not. And if you don't understand that, it's okay, because I didn't either until someone warm explained it to me." The teacher had cried. 3 parents had cried. Woo Hyun had excused himself to the hallway and stood with his back against the wall and his hand over his mouth, shaking. Nadia divided her time between writing and illustrating her second book, working 2 mornings a week at a community art center in Pilsen, where she taught drawing to children in foster care. and being the kind of presence in Minji's life that the word mother didn't quite capture, and no other word had been invented for. She was the warm lady. She was the door. She was the person Minji had pointed at in a restaurant and recognized before recognition made any rational sense. Woo-hyun had changed in ways that the venture capital partners noticed and didn't understand. He left meetings on time. He delegated ruthlessly. He came home for dinner. He cooked, badly, with Minji standing on a step stool beside him, and Nadia correcting his technique from the couch where she was sketching. And the kitchen was always a disaster afterward, and he didn't care. Because the kitchen was full of noise and warmth, and the sound of his daughter laughing, at the way he oversalted everything. On the mantel in the living room, next to a framed first edition of The Girl Who Opened Every Door and a photograph of Mrs. Shin holding Minji at her birthday party in Seoul, there was a crayon drawing in a simple black frame. A door, wide open, with a figure standing in the light beyond it. The first drawing Minji had given Nadia, at Marchetti's, on the second visit. Nadia had kept it in her apron pocket for weeks before it migrated to her nightstand, then to the refrigerator, then to the mantel, where it stayed, the founding document of a family that shouldn't have existed but did. The evening of the book delivery, after the copies had been admired and stacked, and one had been read aloud to Minji for the 100th time, Nadia put Minji to bed. The usual routine: teeth, pajamas, story, the ritual of reassurance that had become so familiar, it was no longer reassurance, but simply the rhythm of a life being lived together. Nadia? Minji's voice from the bed, already drowsy. Yeah, butter pasta, girl. Can you close my door tonight? The request landed softly, but its weight was seismic. Nadia stood very still in the doorway, the open doorway, always open, for 22 months of terror and 3 months of healing and 7 months of love. Always open. Are you sure? I'm sure. Doors are just doors. I'm not scared anymore. Nadia closed the door, gently, all the way, until it clicked. She stood on the other side and pressed her palm flat against the wood and breathed. Woo-hyun was in the hallway. He'd heard. Of course he'd heard. He leaned against the wall across from Minji's closed door. Closed. Fully closed. And looked at Nadia with an expression that contained 2 years of grief and 6 months of joy and an entire future he hadn't thought he was allowed to want. She closed the door. His voice was barely there. She asked me to close it. She said she's not scared anymore. He pulled her toward him, forehead to forehead. The hallway dark, the door closed, their daughter sleeping safely on the other side of it. You did that. You gave her that. We did that, all 3 of us. He kissed her forehead. She closed her eyes. The building hummed around them, the reliable, expensive hum of a heating system that never failed. And below them, the city moved through its ordinary evening, 10 million lives intersecting and diverging, and occasionally, rarely, miraculously colliding in ways that changed everything. A waitress in a restaurant, a child who pointed, 2 words that broke open a world. She's warm. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. What moment hit you the hardest? And when you're ready for the next one, it'll be waiting for you. See you in the next story.